Hey everyone, so today we're going to talk about dirt and wear and how to start adding imperfections into our projects. So if you take a look at my screen here, you see I have like this wheel well for my motorbike that I need to texture. And if you recall, in our last video, we talked about how to bring models into Blender, how to texture them, and how to bring textures back into Blender. And so in this video, we're going to be completely within Substance Painter. I've already UV unwrapped my model. I've baked my mesh maps for my model. And so now it's ready to go and it's ready to be textured. So again, like with our last video, we talked about how to add basic materials. And those basic materials are over on this left-hand side under materials. Now, if we take a look at this kind of wheel well, it looks like it's probably going to be a painted metal. So I could come over to my materials tab and look for metal, find a metal polish, something like this. And then we could even just either change the preset, maybe bring down the roughness or bring up the roughness. And we could also add like a fill layer to give it a tint. Now, the problem with this kind of workflow is it really limits the ability for us to add complexity and tell stories with our models. Because of that, Substance Painter comes with a lot of options and tools in order to add those imperfections and let you tell stories with your models. So a lot of those features are found within Smart Masks and Smart Materials. Now, we just talked about how to add basic materials to our object, and they're pretty standard across the board. So we have this metal texture, and it applies this kind of cool scratchy texture, but it's uniform across the entire model. If we delete these, and instead of looking under materials, come over to Smart Materials, we have a bunch of different options, and these vary pretty widely from each other. So if I was looking for like a painted metal with some wear and maybe some dirt on it, I might take a look at, steel painted scraped dirty. That's like exactly what we were looking for. So if I grab this and just pull it onto our model, you can see pretty quickly it's added some realistic dirt and paint and scratches to our wheel well. And you might be asking yourself, how does it know to add the dirt and grime and scratches onto the model? And all of that is answered with the mesh maps that we bake. Every time we bring a model into Substance Painter, we bake those mesh maps. And like I said in the last video, those mesh maps are essentially like a tailor measuring this model and analyzing it just for this kind of situation. So you can see we have scratches only on these curvature areas. And so what the Smart Material is saying is it's saying everywhere on the model that there's this kind of angle, it wants to add these types of scratches. So it's really, really interesting and really cool. This dirt, the Smart Material is saying every time there's like a cavity or an indent, I want to add this dirt material to fill it up. Now, if we go back over to the right-hand side and analyze our Smart Material, we can click on this folder icon, and you can see ultimately all a Smart Material is a bunch of layers of base materials. And so if we uncheck all of these, we can see just like when we were adding that scratched aluminum onto our model, this Smart Material started in the exact same way. Now if we add on this paint, we can see it's basically just adding a fill layer, but then it's using a mask to kind of dictate where it wants to take that fill layer out. And again, you can solo masks by clicking Alt and clicking on the mask. And then going further, if we click on this channel, you can kind of see what it's doing. This map isn't affecting the color or an actual material, but what it's doing is it's affecting the roughness or shininess of the object. And so originally it has a consistent shine all throughout, but if we take a look at the map, it's saying it wants part of it to be shiny and part of it to be less shiny. And that's to kind of simulate maybe some sun damage that happened to the bike or whatnot. And then coming back up, we have the dirt channel. And again, just like with the paint channel or the paint layer, it's giving us a dirt material but then it's masking it out using the mesh maps to dictate where it wants that dirt material to go. Then finally, we have sharpen, and that's a pretty subtle effect, but essentially what it's doing is it's just sharpening up some of these masks so that it looks a little bit more realistic. So what I really want you to take away from this is that smart materials aren't anything incredibly complex. They're just a folder of materials and masks all bundled together. And frankly, you can really create your own smart materials, and I'll show you how to do it at the end of the lesson. But first, I would like to talk about smart masks. Now that we know that smart materials are just a combination of materials and effects stacked on top of each other, we can kind of assume that smart masks are a similar kind of effect. So if I turn off this smart material, and let's just add a basic material to our wheel well, and then let's add a rust material on top of this. Now, we talked about masks in the last video, and essentially you can add a mask by clicking your material and adding a black mask to it. And we went pretty simple into how to create those masks. And so you can brush out certain parts of your model. You can assign masks to certain polygons or UV groups or materials. But those effects only take you so far. What you really want to be able to do is add masks that kind of interact with the model itself. And so we can see, like with this dirt mask, that's a really complex mask that was added to this wheel well. That is the power of smart masks. This dirt mask is just a smart mask. So if we turn these guys back on, and then we come over, let's exit out of metal, and click on this button here, this will let us see all of the smart masks that Substance Painter automatically has. So we have cavity rust, we have dust plastic, and all of these are using a different combination of our mesh maps in order to create different effects. And so if I drag this cavity rust smart mask over to my mask slot over here, you can see that it's only adding this rust material where it senses a cavity. However, if we decided to, let's see, add this crumples mask, you see it's adding that mask much more uniformly across the model. Now let's see if there's, so let's take a look at just this rust mask here. So as opposed to the cavity rust, this one isn't really taking the cavities or the curvature into account. It's just uniformly spreading that mask across. I'm going to add the cavity rust because I think that does mostly what I want. Even with smart masks, you have a lot of control over exactly how it interacts. And so if I click on the smart mask and then I click on this mask editor, I can come down to the properties and continue to control some of the effects to get exactly what I'm looking for. So I can make the rust a little bit more subtle. Then let's just say we want to add a paint level on top of this. First, I'm going to change the color of the metal to that aluminum. Maybe let's bring the roughness up a little bit. Not that high. Or maybe I'll just use a different metal. Yeah, that might be, I like that. So we have kind of this sandblasted or whatnot metal. Let's take off these here. So I have the metal and I have the rust, but I think this needs some sort of a paint added to it. So let's just go to my basic materials and find a paint material. Okay, let's use this paint spray material and drag it under the rust. Let's figure out how we can start to chip away some of this paint in order to make it look a little bit more used. Firstly though, I'm gonna change the color to something I like more. Let's pick this kind of green color. And then I'm gonna switch it to triplanar projection just because I think it will give a better overall look to it. Okay, so how are we gonna, also, let's see if we can get rid of some of these bumps. I don't love those. Okay, how are we gonna add those chips? So we're probably gonna want to add some sort of a mask to this paint layer. So let's do that. Let's add a white mask though, because we want most of the paint to be there. And then let's go over to our smart masks. And Actually, let's see if there's a good paint smart mask. So we have like a kind of a scratched mask. This one might be kind of cool. Let's try this one real quick. Okay, that might be a little too intense. Now, you see how this mask is mostly black, and so most of the paint is being taken away. If we like the mask, but we want to invert it, we're able to do that. And we can do that with effects. You can find effects up here under this magic wand icon. So if I added a levels effects, and I just inverted it, you can see now that the mask has been inverted, it keeps most of my paint, but it just kind of gets rid of little bits of it. I think I like this, but let's just try this paint subtle, what is it? Paint subtle scratched to see if that's more what I'm going for. Yeah, those are close. I think I actually like this last one a little bit more. Awesome. Now, you might not realize it, but we just created a smart material. All we have to do in order to seal the deal of it being a smart material is come up and create a folder up here and then drag these materials into it. And let's name it Old Painted Rust Metal. And then if we right click this folder and come down to create smart material, it will save, you can see, let's see, it's gonna save it in our smart material tab. And so now it's right here. So we could even delete this guy and drag it back on from our material tab, and there it is. And it's not set in stone, so we could even change the color of our paint if we wanted. Creating your own custom smart materials is super useful, especially when you're texturing a lot of elements at once. And so for instance, if I have 2 of these wheel wells on my bike, I could add the smart material to both wheel wells, but then modify one of them so it doesn't look quite as uniform. And just like creating smart materials yourself, we're also able to make our own smart masks, or at least build upon a mask in order to get what we're looking for. So let's just kind of create another simple texture setup. So let's look for a metal base material, and let's just add a simple coat of paint on that guy. And again, let's change it to a less obnoxious color like that, right? Okay, so if we wanted to create our own smart mask, all we'd have to do is start by creating a mask, and I'm going to start with a white mask. And then we just go up to this effect panels and start adding effects on top of that mask to get what we want. And so a good place to start is by clicking Add Generator. And so you see that appears beneath our mask. Now if we click this generator button, we have a bunch of ways that we can manipulate this mask using the model itself. So like I said, all of these smart masks are using the mesh maps, or that tailor-made measurement of your model, in order to create effects. And so if I use the curvature generator, it's going to use the curvature information to add paint only to where a certain amount of curvature is occurring. Now you can see that's probably not the effect we want, but we can continue to modify this until it is what we want. And so again, if we want to invert this mask, we could click on this effects panel and add a levels and invert, and now most of our model is going to have paint on it. Now, rarely are you going to have a paint that fades so gently on an object, and so we could even sharpen this contrast in order to make it look like the paint was scraped off in an accident or something. So if I go back to my effects panel, but instead of going to generator, I go to add filter, and let's look for sharpen. See what that does. So sharpen might not be the way to go, but let's try something else. Let's try filter. Let's look for contrast. That does something. Again, not sure that's what we want. Oh, you see, we made a mistake. We've been adding this to the actual material and not the mask. And so that's something I actually make the mistake of a fair amount. So if it's acting really weird, you might want to make sure that you're working on the mask itself and not on the material. So let's add that contrast again and bring that up. Okay, so it's sharpening up. Now let's add another levels and see what that does. Oh, interesting. So now we're having more specific areas, getting that contrast. You know, this isn't quite what I want, but honestly, that's that's texturing, that's using Substance Painter. 90% of it is experimentation, and so you have to go down a lot of wrong roads in order to really be able to problem solve and get exactly what you want. So I'm going to actually delete these effects, and instead I'm going to go back to Add Generator, and I'm going to add a mask builder. And this is, I can already tell that this probably needs to be inverted, so I'm going to do that by adding levels and then inverting it. Now the mask builder is really cool because it gives you a lot of different attributes to work with really early on. And so you can really start to craft an effect you're looking for without adding too many effects right off the bat. You see, I'm making a lot quicker progress than I was by just adding effects. And so this mask builder is a really good place to start when you're texturing an object. And I could go through this for a long time and just manipulating it and messing with things. But ultimately what you want to remember is texturing is storytelling. Every prop you texture, everything you add a material to, it has imperfections and detail to it, all to support the story of the game you're doing this for or the animation you're doing it for. And so think about that as you add these masks and materials. What's the story you're trying to tell? And that will help guide most of your decisions if you have that overarching view of what you're trying to create. Now, just before we end, smart materials are amazing, smart masks are amazing. I create my own smart materials a ton. I don't often create my own smart masks, and that is because Substance Painter already comes with a lot of variations of smart masks, and each of these variations allow for a lot of modifications. And even if a smart mask doesn't do exactly what I'm wanting it to do, I can always add another black mask and paint in my own extra detail to tell whatever extra story I'm trying to convey. And so I just keep that in mind. It won't necessarily make your model better if you create your own smart masks, but oftentimes creating your own smart material will give you a ton of control in the story you're trying to tell. That about does it for this video. If you want to stick on with these videos as I make them, just click that alert or subscribe button and YouTube should notify you when there's a new one. But yeah, see you next time.